after we finish reading the book or watching the movie The Godfather, we're left with a question. Is this the story of a success or of a failure? From the point of view of the Corleone family, well, it is a success story. They are at the top of their games. They defeat the enemies. They are as powerful as they've ever been. But if we look at it from the perspective of the Italian-American history, the history of Italian Americans, well, it is a failure. It is the story of a failure of integration. Why do I say so? Well, it's because despite all the riches and all the power that the Corleone family has, they are not invited. They are not part of society. They are marginalized. They have this splendid wedding for Don Corleone's daughter, but it takes place in a walled garden, outside, not in a major hotel. When photographers or the media tries to snap photos of them, it is not because of the lure and the fascination, the allure and the fascination with these people, but it's because of the seedy side of their lives. Yes, they control senators, journalists, judges, they have them in their pockets, but these people cannot attend the wedding of Don Corleone's daughter, which is the most important day of his life too. He cannot refuse anybody's favor on the day of his daughter's wedding, if you remember. Well, that indicates that although success has arrived, it has not arrived in the form that society accepts. If we look at the materials that we examined in the course, we start from the very bottom with the cartoons, where Italians are not even human. They are rats and they are apes, and they bring social diseases with them from Europe. We move a little bit higher on the ladder of integration with the videos with Blackhand and Skyscrapers of New York. These people are slightly more socialized, but they are criminal elements. They are elements that are dangerous elements that ought to be looked at with a suspicious eye. We go forward and we encounter the history of Pascal, who is isolated with a group of people who are not at all part of society, who end up working in the woods in West Virginia. So clearly, yes, contributing labor, but nothing else. Nothing else of their effort is accepted. When Pascal has his poem published, Pascal has to beg to get his poems published, to get it published. Well, we move a little further up, and we see that even the emigrante represents this solitary figure, this individual. He tries to integrate himself with America, but he ends up rejecting America. He runs away. He goes back to Italy. Either he didn't make it, or he found that the place is not what he hoped it would be. Other elements that we encounter is, the other next step is the Italian. The Italian is someone who wants to come to America, who wants to establish himself, who actually establishes a family. But again, the difficulties that he encounters are enormous. And in a way, he is represented as someone who, underneath a veneer of civilization, still hides tendencies and instincts that are more animal-like than human-like. Again, one more step, and we come to the very first beginning of the integration in the social structure, and it is Christ in concrete. We have families, we have communities, we have the tenement, we have the neighborhood, we have a party, fiesta, where their culture is manifested in all of its expressions, particularly dance and food. And we begin to see this effort to become part of society. My children will be the great American builders, says Jeremiah in the first chapter before he dies. Well, here we are. What happens at this point? The real reasons why Italians go underground and disappear from the social agenda in America in the 30s are still disputed, and it is for sociologists and political scientists to discuss. What I observed is the fact that The Godfather, that looks back at the 40s, is a book that talks about marginalization and exclusion from society. Well, it's a failure because something happened that blocked, that stopped the process of integration. Later on, I will introduce a short video, a home video, that discusses the creation of the little Italies, these isolated communities that grew and remained like fortresses, surrounded by cities that were changing very, very rapidly around them. Little Italy downtown, Mulberry Street, remained the same until the 70s abundantly, and other similar communities remained, like in Brooklyn. Bensonhurst remained isolated and separated in large and non-integrated. That's the key word, not integrated, until the late 80s, for instance. So there is something about a collective failure of integration. And that results still in the abundance of stereotypes that people feel free to use openly, even in this time and age. You remember the cartoon that appeared on the New Yorker, which is a very liberal and very progressive magazine, but it is a cartoon that, in order to communicate unscrupulous business methods, resorts to the icon that is most typical of Italian Americans, that of mafia goons. So I don't think that many other quote-unquote races, ethnic groups that have come to America about 150 years ago would still be characterized in those terms. Of course, we know about racism. We know about the attitudes about Hispanic immigrants, Muslims, Arabs, and of course we know the attitude about African Americans. But if we were to look at other quote-unquote European white immigrant groups, I think that Italians to this still to this very day are probably the only ones that have these heavy stereotypes applied to them. Maybe the situation is changing in the last 10-15 years. It has, at least from my perspective, significantly, but it has as a result of the dismantling of the little Italies. The Godfather is a look back at a period when Italians were in society, but they were not really accepted as a constituent and a normal integrated constituent of society.